Smallpox has been one of the most feared and deadly diseases of all time, a major tragedy for the entire world, killing hundreds of millions in the 1900s alone. Yet the invention of the smallpox vaccine was a major triumph to eradicating the virus from existence and saving millions. The time is around 3rd century BC. Chinese dynasties are forming, while the Punic Wars are being fought out in the Mediterranean region. Rome peaks in power as other ancient civilizations across the world develop and advance. And there is a new epidemic spreading across the planet. Pus-filled bruises all over the body, known as pustules. High fever, fatigue, nausea, coughing to the point where there's blisters on your throat, and just general discomfort, like you're about to die. This disease spreads faster than a wildfire. Millions upon millions of lives have been taken by this disease. Within time, this epidemic became a pandemic. But then, what is this monster? This virus goes by the name variola, or better known as smallpox. It was once said to be an unbeatable scourge to the human race, but was that really true? The first seen cases of smallpox were likely from ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, likely due to historical researchers discovering ancient mummies over 5,000 years old with smallpox-like pustules on their skin. It is not exactly confirmed when the first described case was, but we can only go back in time so far. The time period when the most notorious descriptions and diagnostics was the 3rd century BC, when cases were starting to pop up everywhere. After 5th century BC was when the smallpox virus was named. The scientific name for smallpox, variola, was introduced by Bishop Marius of Avicenum of Switzerland, who introduced the Latin word variola meaning pox or pustule. This term was also used to describe other viruses ending in pox, meaning that they caused pox, aka pustules, on the skin. Who were the people being infected by smallpox? About 30% of smallpox victims were children who were at most vulnerable to the virus. Anyone, anywhere, at any moment was able to get it without even knowing the first few days of infection. Even the people living the healthiest of lifestyles were still prone to infection. Why was it able to spread so easily? When the age of exploration began, smallpox became even more relevant. This time it made its first debut in the Americas. This was when explorers such as Christopher Columbus and the Spanish conquistadors started going to the Americas. Christopher Columbus's crew had actually introduced smallpox to the Americas as a way to take over the land owned by the natives, and to take their belongings back to Europe, and to get more Europeans to come to the Americas. Thousands of Native Americans wound up dying from smallpox alone. Settlers, soldiers, and colonists would give the Native Americans materials, such as blankets, that were contaminated with the smallpox virus. The Native Americans proved to be very weak by the smallpox, so taking over the land was a cakewalk for the Europeans. Smallpox was now the most feared and deadly pandemic on the entire planet. Before there was a vaccine, people all over the world had tried to come up with ways to deal with smallpox. Some places imprisoned those with the virus, or kept them in a remote place far from others, or even left them behind to die, while others tried to come up with treatments. Some of the most notorious ways of treatment were the various beliefs that one could be made immune to the virus like smallpox. There was a method in which a healthy person free of smallpox would be injected with the pus from a pustule of someone who formerly had smallpox. This wasn't as successful as other treatments because it sometimes resulted in the patient just catching smallpox anyway or even dying. A more notorious treatment from China that was used and was done by grinding the scabs from pustules into a powder and blowing the powder through a tube up a healthy person's nose. This was called inoculation or variolation. This procedure was working and was starting to be done all around the world. But the problem was that it wasn't the safest option. It was also too expensive and was difficult to adopt in certain places such as the military. Edward Jenner of England, born May 17, 1749, in Berkeley, Gloucestershire, was a medical scientist and immunologist. As a kid, expressed a strong interest in science and nature that continued throughout his whole life. At age 13, he was apprenticed by a country surgeon in Sodbury, near Bristol. Then one day he heard a dairymaid say, "I shall never have smallpox, for I have cowpox. I shall never have an ugly pock-marked face." When Edward Jenner heard that, he had become more observant of dairymaids, but then he realized it seemed as dairymaids were somehow protected from smallpox. While Jenner completed his apprenticeship at age 21, he went to London where he became a student of John Hunter. John Hunter was not only a teacher, but a surgeon, respected biologist, anatonomist, and experimental scientist. Edward Jenner and John Hunter grew a strong, firm friendship until 1793, when John Hunter passed away. Before John Hunter's death, Edward Jenner only grew more interested in science. He even helped Captain James Cook classify all the species of organisms he had brought back from his first voyage in 1772 from Hawaii. Yet Jenner had declined the second invitation to help Captain James Cook for the second voyage. 1773, Edward Jenner returned to Berkeley to practice medicine and to learn about this cowpox those dairymaids were talking about. Edward Jenner knew about variolation and other smallpox prevention practices, and wanted to try to make his own kind of treatment that would be safer and less expensive. So then he pondered in the thought that if dairymaids are protected from smallpox and know about cowpox, he decided to experiment with this cowpox. He learned that cowpox can be transmitted like smallpox, but was far less dangerous than smallpox and was only found mostly in cows and horses. So then he looked into the protective effects of cowpox against smallpox. Edward Jenner met up with a young dairymaid, Sarah Nelms, who had cowpox lesions on her hands. On May 14, 1796, after learning from Sarah Nelms, Edward Jenner inoculated 8-year-old boy James Phipps. James had mild fever and discomfort across his entire body. 9 days after inoculation, he had experienced chills and had lost his appetite. The next day, James felt completely better. Then in July of 1796, Edward Jenner inoculated James again, but this time with a fresh smallpox lesion. When he did this, no disease formed and James had shown no symptoms of smallpox. Edward Jenner tried this experiment on many others who were interested in how the procedure works, and no one caught smallpox. There was still the worry of possible errors, but Edward Jenner did everything to get this approved because he sweared it worked. Despite controversy being spread about the vaccine, the procedure had spread all across England, and later in the 1800s, all of Europe knew about this vaccine. When Edward Jenner died in 1823 of a massive stroke, the vaccine was still spread across Europe and was safety approved. Late 1800s, soon the whole world knew about the smallpox vaccine. World Health Organization heavily advocated the vaccine. The day came on May 8, 1980. The World Health Organization announced the eradication of smallpox. Smallpox ceased to exist, and this was a monumental achievement, all thanks to a motivated 18th century scientist, a dairymaid, and an 8-year-old boy.